Hi students, today we are going to discuss about another 5-mark important university repeatedly asking question, right? It is actually coming under protein metabolism and that too plasma protein, right? Name of the plasma protein, functions of the plasma protein, normal levels of the plasma protein. After that we will be having important 5-mark question is name the acute phase reactants or acute phase proteins. Okay, that is why APP, this is known as acute phase proteins, right? Or some books says APR also, acute phase reactant. What is the definition? When there is any stimulus for any organ, any tissue, they will produce some markers in the conditions of inflammation, infection, burns, trauma, etc. So how you are going to give the introduction for this acute phase protein? When there is any stimulus for any organ which will release some markers in the situation of inflammation, infection, burns and trauma, right? Some markers level get elevated in serum known as inflammatory markers, right? Some markers level will get lowered, some markers will get elevated in these conditions. That is known as inflammatory markers or otherwise called as acute phase proteins. So all are produced in liver. This is very important questions. All the acute phase reactants are synthesized from liver only. Next, and this inflammatory markers released is responsible by cytokines, which is released by macrophages and neutrophils. Cytokines. The examples are interleukin 168 and TNF alpha, that is tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interferons, some interferons. So in this slide, the important point is liver. The organ synthesizing acute phase proteins is liver, and the responsible factor for these inflammatory factors are cytokines. Examples are interleukin, tumor necrosis factor alpha and interferon. So in this acute phase proteins we are having one more classification. It's nothing but positive acute phase proteins and negative acute phase proteins. Positive acute phase protein means the concentration is increased in plasma, whereas negative acute phase protein means decreased concentration in plasma, right? The next point is we are having some examples for both these positive and negative markers. So you have to choose any 2 or 3 for positive and negative, and you have to mention the functions of the marker individually, right? So here I am having 5 markers, that is CRP, C-reactive protein, CP, ceruloplasmin, AAT means alpha-1 antitrypsin, fibrinogen and hepcidin. You all know the functions of these markers. I once again repeat the functions for all the markers. CRP means it is a common marker in all inflammation and infection conditions. Ceruloplasmin is useful for the transportation and utilization of iron. A1AT means alpha-1 antitrypsin, which is deficient in emphysema condition, lung diseases for some smokers, chronic smokers like that. And fibrinogen means it is involved in blood clotting. Hepcidin means it is involved in iron regulation. So like that you pick up any 2 or 3 markers and then mention the functions of it. Okay. Coming to the negative markers, we are having albumin, prealbumin, transferrin, retinol binding protein, trans-cartin, right? The name itself trans-cartin. So transportation of cortisol is the function of this one. Retinol binding protein, you all know the retinol means vitamin A, so the transportation of vitamin A, retinol binding protein is needed. Then transferrin, it is involved in the ion transport. Then albumin, this is one of the very important plasma protein. The functions are maintains the colloidal osmotic pressure, act as a nutrient, involved in acid base balance, act as a buffer, like that. It is having important functions. Next one is prealbumin. It is also having two compounds, that is thyroid binding prealbumin, retinol binding prealbumin, right? So you here also you have to pick up any 2 or 3 with their functions. The last point for this APP, that is acute phase protein, is what are all the adverse effects they are going to produce. Usually fever, anemia, anorexia, lethargy, right? Common symptoms only, but very very important symptoms. Anemia, fever, anorexia, lethargy are the adverse effects or signs and symptoms of this acute phase proteins produce. Okay.